Hello, and welcome to Practical Intuition with Kay. This is the show where we are always working to help you come from the best place inside of you as you're making choices and creating your life, and being able to tune out the pressures outside of yourself that might derail you, and instead really just being able to make your choices from your heart. I am Kay. I am a coach. I'm an artist. I'm an adventurer. And today I am so very excited because I'm here with my friend, Brian Bogert. Uh, Brian, to me, you are a person who shows up so fully in the world. And uh, the experiences that you've had in your life and the way that you use them as fuel for empowerment and the way that you help others from a place inside yourself of self-love and comfort inside is a huge inspiration to me personally. And I'm so excited to have you here because this is going to be an awesome conversation. So welcome.
Well, I'm grateful to be here with you. I'm grateful that our mutual good friend Shannon Connery made the connection. It was one that the second we connected, it was deep, right? It was real, it was raw, and your heart came open and apparent, and your warmth just bled through. So I'm really excited for this today and just continuing to deepen and expand on our relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Same. And I think I'm gonna say at the beginning of the show that there's it'll either be, somewhere less than an hour or it might be a little bit more. And so we're just gonna be riding on the current of this fun river, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's pretty much all we can do in life, right? The only way
Yeah.
to be in flow is to exist within the chaos and still be centered and grounded. So that's what we're going to do today. We'll
Yeah.
be as present as we can while we can, and we'll go from there.
Yay. It sounds absolutely perfect. I um I got to listen to, or I am listening to, I've gotten to listen to a good part of your conversation with our mutual friend Shannon Connery. And like I I think I wanted to start there because uh what you I love how you're celebrating Shannon in that conversation. Like there's a part at the beginning where you kind of say like the fun about podcasting is you get to be interested rather than
Yeah, I'm
interesting, right?
interested and interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, in your guest. And I would love to celebrate you and give you that gift today. And I'm curious, you know, would you share a little bit with us about the journey that you're on and what it's like?
Yeah. Yeah. What's a fun one? And I'm finally living the dream that I've been wanting for the last 20 years in the most recent 18 to 24 months, which is really beautiful. I'll start by just giving a little feel for who I am, and then I'll give you an element of some of the story pieces that shape what I'm doing and who I am today.
Mm,
I always say I'm a husband and father first. It's the only thing binary in my world. Meaning, if my wife and my kids aren't good, then I walk away from everything else. I
mm,
say that very clearly today. I've said that for 25 years, but my actions were not always congruent with that
mm,
statement, even though my intent always was. And so I'm deeply fascinated by the human experience. I've been studying human behavior, human connection, and human performance for like 20 years. And by virtue of pure curiosity in humankind, but also because I needed to learn and develop models for myself to learn and grow and ultimately shed some of the layers of my past that were keeping me stuck and weighed down. So I'll start at really the beginning of where a lot of the trauma in my life started to come in.
mm,
My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to just get a 1 inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to the car, anybody who's known me for more than about 2 minutes knows I talk fast, I walk fast. I've always had this like vigor for life. So I was the first one in the car. I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use, dude. And I'm waiting for my mom to catch up. Her and my brother are 3 or 4 feet behind me. And this was back in the days before there was key fobs. So
mm,
she had to literally reach her hand in the purse, grab the keys, pull them out, stick them in the door, and turn them before we could go on with our way. So in that time, there was a truck that pulled in front of the store, parked, and the driver and middle passenger got out. Passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do. He scooted over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead
mm,
hit the gas.
Hmm.
Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard, and before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at me with no time to react.
Wow.
Whenever the tree in the median hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to sever my left arm completely from my body.
Yeah. And for folks listening, Brian just showed us his arm. Yeah.
And my mom and brother were there and witnessed the whole thing. It was
Mm.
August 10th, 1992. It was a 115-degree day. And the next thing my mom heard was my brother's voice saying, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there."
Oh
And as
my
she looks
goodness.
up, following the trail to where he was pointing, she sees a string of my muscle cooking like hamburger on the parking lot.
Wow.
I'm blessed because there was a nurse there that day who saved my life and my limb. She went immediately into action, came over and saved my life by stopping the bleeding, and she had my arm on ice within minutes to give me a fighting chance of having it be reattached.
Wow.
And the thing I have to pause and say very, very clearly for anybody who's listening is what I've learned in 31 years of telling my story, because it is pretty unique, is how unique it really is.
Mm.
However, what I've also what I've also learned is how unique every single one of your stories is.
Mm.
What's important is that we learn to pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from our stories so that we become intentional in how we apply them in our lives moving forward. We all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. And
Mm.
so that was kind of the beginning of a whole variety of things that kept taking place over the course of the next 20 to 25 years before I finally woke up and realized that what I believed was my transformation story was really just the story that created a lot of trash from my past that I buried and pushed down for years.
Mm.
And as a result, it ultimately created damage in my world in ways that I wasn't conscious to, in ways that I wasn't congruent. And so it took a lot of internal work, a lot of, unavoidable precursors to change by accepting my current state of things and moving myself in many different moments through life to use perspective to point me towards what was important.
Mm. Um, we're gonna be able to swear in this conversation. We can make it.
I
We'll
love,
just put the little e. Well, so everybody listening, there's gonna
love
be
it.
some swearing, and I think unless you jump in right now, I'm gonna kick it off with. I think we both, and I mean this in a very good and gentle way. I think we both understand. We've earned this fucking joy.
Dude, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, I got chills right when you said that. I'll tell you though that it didn't come in the ways that I would have expected it to.
Oh, I love that. Oh, talk more about that. Yes.
You know, I I was a fighter for most of my life. I fought for everything. Fought to be seen, fought to be understood, fought to prove what was possible both to myself and to other people. I fought physical pain for daily impact for nearly 31 years. I fought all of the interference and resistance inside of me. I tried to fight the narratives of the world, but I woke up a few years ago after about a decade into my development journey and realized that fighting takes me further away from what I really want.
Oh, wow.
Fighting fighting forces aside. There's a winner and a
Mhm.
loser. It's a zero-sum game, right? And so that's why we see the whole world divided right now between what's black and what's white. And I don't mean that literally, just that life is all about contrast, but people live and exist in camps that they feel safe to the point that they don't see the whole picture.
Yeah.
Right? If we think of a pendulum or a clock pendulum swinging, right? Fighting means we're forcing one side.
Yeah.
The reality of it is the gift is almost always in the gray area.
Wow.
And so for me, it shifted from fighting to surrender. And that was a difficult thing to do. And what does surrender mean? It means surrender to realize that all I can be is present in this moment. Trust that I'm going to be protected and promoted by the universe, God, Allah, whatever language you use, right? Don't let the language get in the way of the lesson. But
Mm.
what I would suggest is that surrender for me was also surrendering to the fact that like everything happens exactly the way that it's supposed to, exactly in the time that it's supposed to, if we allow it.
Mm.
And so it's a scary place to be. I think of joy, freedom, and fulfillment, right? I fought for that for years. But then when we think about freedom, It's also, I believe, what everybody wants, but most people, I think, really think it's the scariest place to be. Okay, do you know what happens? Do you know what happens when a plane flies in parabolic flight?
Well, what's parabolic flight, first of all? That's like,
Parabolic flight, so a parabola, they're flying up and down
okay,
like this.
up and down. So
Okay.
Brian's got
So
his
they're flying
arm.
up and down, almost like a roller coaster that's just repeating a bunch of hills, right?
Yep, yep.
So
Okay.
a plane flying in parabolic flight, do you know what happens when they do that?
No.
It creates weightlessness for the passengers.
Oh.
Okay. So they use this to train people to go into space, just like they do when they're actually putting folks in like the submerging of water, because it has a similar effect.
Hmm.
But in the areas where they actually experience weightlessness, it's not in the poles, it's in the middle of the
In
flight
the
path.
middle.
Right. And here's the thing, we look at weightlessness and this concept of it as freedom. I mean, it is. We're not attached to anything.
Hmm.
But that's why most people are terrified, because they're so used to anchoring outside of themselves.
Hmm.
The real gift of surrender is when you can learn to anchor in you, joy, freedom, fulfillment, and all of the abundant elements with energy, money, love, relationships finally have a chance to flow.
Hmm. Hmm. I love this so much. And it's funny because it's really getting into something that I've been, I guess, playing with in my mind a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Like you well, you, Brian, wouldn't be surprised. I've been a little surprised at how often the concept of when I am fighting something, what I'm really doing is putting my attention on the thing I don't want. I keep
Bingo.
looking at the thing I don't want because I'm fighting it, right? And that has come up so often in conversation, in coaching, in just in like in the zeitgeist, I think. And the way I've kind of been thinking of it is, what does it look like when instead of fighting the thing, whatever that is, instead of fighting for our values, which really ends up looking like, this is, again, this is me, like no one has to agree, but this is how I've been thinking about it. When we're fighting for our values, what we're really doing is we're concentrating on beating down the other person's or the other entity's values. And what does it look
Bingo.
like when we can be above that and instead see the system that we were caught in? And what does it mean when we can look away from that fighting and instead just sort of be in the flow? I mean, you keep using these wonderful words too. Like, does that
It
make
it
sense?
it it, it makes complete sense. And I'll explain it through a framework that I have come to understand and teach. I mean, I think if we look at the human experience, I think there's four things that every single one of us seeks and desires.
Mm.
We all want to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to feel protected.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to feel seen and understood.
Mm-hmm.
And we all want to feel connected.
Mm.
Right? The second we walk into an environment that we don't feel safe, protected, seen, understood, or connected, right? Or we're in a room of people, maybe it's a networking event and everybody wants something from you and they're handing out business cards and it's right. Or you're heading back to see your family after 20 years of beliefs of what's going to take place at the holidays, and you start actually anticipating already what could happen, and you go into this with this protective state, right? Or you may know that you're about ready to engage in a dialogue with somebody who has a very different viewpoint than you, and you're already going into it with a protective nature, right? Which
Mm.
is the design of our nervous systems, which is to protect us,
Yeah.
right? Fight,
Yeah.
flight, or fawn comes from that direct nature of survival. So it would make sense that our bodies would communicate to us in moments that we don't feel safe and protected that we need to protect ourselves.
Mm.
Right. So if you think about this, though, through the lens of when we protect ourselves, you're familiar with those 35-gallon black trash bags for outdoor bins.
Yep.
Imagine unfolding one, grabbing onto each corner. And if you hold it in front of you, above your eye line, right, so that you can't see through it,
Mm-hmm.
that's now your armor. Okay. Now I'm
Mm-hmm.
using trash because trash from your past is one of the things that I do. I'm known as the garbage man because I help people identify and remove the trash from their past or transform it into treasure. And
Mm.
we can do this with waste, and turning our waste into wealth, to connect and convert in the growth of our lives. But when we do this and we throw our armor up here, now I want you or anyone listening to imagine, who's one person in your life two people in your life or a whole group of people in your life that you really desire sees you, understands you, and connects with you.
Mm.
And now let me ask you a question. How could you ever expect them to see you, know who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your boundaries, your value, your worth, your heart, your desire, your intent, your soul, delivered through an opaque force field? And oh, by the way, that's also assuming that they're not carrying their own armor that's going to further dilute the message.
Mm.
And so we teach this concept of a protector and a connector, which requires us to have a strong spine and a soft front. What does that mean? Strong spine is I know who I am. I know what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, where my boundaries are, where my value is, all the things I just listed. I know those things. So I can be unwavering in any environment, which means that inherently I no longer need to protect myself.
Mm.
So I can lower my armor in those moments and wrap a layer of protection around the environments I'm in to ensure that everyone in there can be safe, protected, seen, understood, and connected. But when we think about this, armor protects pain.
Mm.
Boundaries are a communicated contract that exists based on your clear existence. Armor literally is there designed to protect yourself and to push everyone and everything away from you. Anger
Mm.
is armor, ego is armor, right? That's literally what they are. And so if we can recognize that the second we protect ourselves, we actually guarantee we're going to disconnect ourselves from the two things we want most, which is to be seen and understood and connected at a deep level.
Mm.
So again, fighting isn't where we get this. That only happens through surrender. When all parties, or at least one brave party, is willing to lower their armor to create and shift the energy and environment to allow everyone to experience what's possible.
Wow. I mean, just the vision of that trash bag getting put down, like, and the feeling of that, there. So, do you? I mean, it brings up for me the concepts of sort of like vulnerability and shame. I think this was a Brene Brown thing at the beginning of it all. Or when I first heard of it, it was Brene Brown speaking on it. That vulnerability and shame are two sides of the same coin.
They are. And I believe that true strength actually hides behind vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right? So Brene is actually the one who allowed me to understand that I was even dealing with shame in the first place.
Mm.
And here's the truth, like shame is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing because it shows up as about 50 different emotions. Right? It
Mm-hmm.
becomes really confusing. And until we can understand the patterns or the physiological patterns within ourselves and really in a deeper understanding of what's driving it, we can't really free and escape it. So her two narratives around shame, the way she outlined it was what concreted this for me, because the first is I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I would argue that that's not been my predominant narrative. I'd be lying if I told you I didn't have moments there, but I've not really ever struggled with my worth and my value.
Mm.
However, I grew up in a house where there was one right way to do everything,
Mm.
right? And so the other side of shame is when you shut that down, you show up in the arena and you're ready to go to battle. It's who the fuck do you think you are?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
For
You
me,
don't
the
get to
bigger I
tell me.
lived, the right. Like who are you to step out and be so bold? Who are you to go chase your dreams? Who are you to break the model of what's possible? Like, right? And
Yeah.
so everything major I ever did, I felt the need to apologize for, and I started pulling the throttle back in my own life. Shame truly is difficult because it's so subtly embedded into so many elements of our society. I mean,
Mm.
think about it. We're born as our brightest, most authentic burning lights will ever be. Anybody who's had kids or been around kids can know this, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
raw, they're real, they're authentic. They live and exist with wonder and creativity. And then what happens? Parents, teachers, coaches, employers start saying, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. You should be this, you shouldn't be that. You should want this, you shouldn't want that. You should have this kind of house, this kind of car, live in this kind of neighborhood. You should never associate with these types of people. Should is a shame-based word because it
Yeah.
implies whoever you are or whatever you're doing, it's not good enough. And so what
Yeah.
starts to happen is we start funneling ourselves down until we exist within inside this box, not based on who we are, but instead who the world has told us who to be.
Yeah.
And so shame just is a never-ending perpetual cycle until you can get to the source or sources of the shame and how that patterns forward for you.
So that's really cool and interesting to think about, because if I might have used different words on my sort of journey of learning and discovery. And it really does amount to that, like the being able to see what was, causing me to feel shame, and to
Yeah.
understand that those things come from outside of me, and that, like, it's really okay to want what I want, or
Yeah.
wear what I wear, or like, I can remember, when I was a kid, when I was 10, I got chicken pox, which was kind of late. And so I got it really bad. Like, usually,
Yeah.
like, my youngest brother had it at like 1 or something like that. And so the difference between him experiencing chickenpox and me experiencing chickenpox, like, he has a lot less scarring, for example. And one of the places that I got most scarred was my forehead.
Mm.
And like, I had these big, ugly pock marks on my forehead. And all of my life, I can't even tell you when these things have grown away. Uh, I would say that they've been becoming less and less noticeable basically for the last probably couple decades. And
Yeah.
I would comb my hair down in these bangs, and I would, like, really hide my
Yeah.
fucking forehead. And, like, in the last maybe 6 months, I'm like, "You know what, though? I kinda don't wanna have to worry about all the hairspray that it takes to make this do. What if I just put it in a clip?" Like, and like, the other really interesting and fun thing about, and I'm just realizing this now, having my hair in a clip like this, like it is now, it makes me feel in a very good way like the child that I was, because I did
Yeah.
used to wear my hair up in clips, and it's
Your
so
bangs were armor for you,
yeah,
right? Your
right?
bangs were armor because they were protecting what you were not comfortable with and the
Yep,
fear of judgment, criticism, or how that would come across, right? And shame can be formed in moments that simple,
yep,
right? I
yep,
mean, if I look at some of the sources of my shame, right, it took me work to get here. But when I came out of the hospital, after 2 weeks in the original run, I had a teddy bear in between my arm because I
mm,
needed my arm to heal at 90 degrees. So inevitably, right, I'm this cute 7-year-old that's got a loud, like, vibrant personality, and everyone would come up and be like, "What happened to you, Brian?" Right? And they're expecting me to say something like, "Well, my brother and I were racing our bikes down the street, and I crashed, or I flew off the jungle gym." But
mm,
what would I do? I'd own my truth, and I'd look them right in the eyes, and I'd say, "I was run over by a truck, and my left arm was torn off."
wow.
After I saw their jaws hit the ground and got really used to seeing them pick it back up, 99% of people would do this. They'd pause and they'd turn to my parents for validation.
As in, is it
Which told
really
me,
true what he's
right?
saying?
Which told me what? Right? Which told me what? They weren't seeing me. They weren't understanding me. They weren't connecting with me. They were
Yeah.
questioning whether or not the truth that I'm living and I'm literally in my body showing you and telling you what happened, and you're
Mm,
not accepting my own reality. Right? And so those are moments, right? How many times has anyone listening to this or you felt like, man, I'm not being seen and understood? Man, I'm living and existing in my truth, and yet it's not being recognized, witnessed, or accepted,
mm,
right? Any moment like that, whether it's intentional or not, can create these moments of retreat within us. The other thing that those same people would do is they'd start to view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately telling me what I could and couldn't do and what I was and wasn't going to be able to do for the rest of my life.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
though I didn't have the words for it then, that was my reaction, was essentially fuck that,
Mm,
right? Like I wasn't going to be confined by either one. But what did that also do? It also caused me to lean in and create an intellectual element of armor that I didn't understand for years,
mm,
right? Because I was told if you had a good mindset, if you were mentally tough, you can do anything, Brian. So what did I do? Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And I broadcasted that to the world. And oh, by the way, I did, Kay. I
mm,
crushed expectations. I
mm.
did many, many things that were unbelievable, but I was proving it to myself.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's just really what happened, right? And so I created armor to protect myself from where I thought I wasn't going to be seen, understood, and accepted for
Mm.
exactly who I was. And those are moments that everyone experiences.
And, like, how much I don't know, more really better, wonderful the world is when you don't have to have any armor, and you can simply be, like, living into the positive feelings, and
Yeah.
the
It's
knowledge without trying
completely
to
different.
convince yourself, right?
It's completely different. right?
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
that's what hurts a lot of people today is they're just told, right? There's narratives out there that's like, well, you just got to work harder, right? You just need to do more. You need to hustle more. You need to have a better mindset. You need to have more mental toughness.
Mm.
But the issue is that I think my pattern is not dissimilar from most. Most people experience things physically first, and then they escape into their brains, and then they get stuck perseverating for years, and they don't ever allow the full embodiment of what's happening within themselves,
Mm.
right? So it's just they shut themselves off.
Yeah. This is so interesting. I was literally in a conversation just before this conversation, talking with someone about what they'd like to create, which is, I think, a very, very fun place to kind of begin, uh, like working together with someone. And like, what, when we got to the end of our conversation, the feelings were of wanting to create a frequent focus on dreams that are held
Mm,
really lightly. And the idea of having to set aside the quote Protestant work ethic of like, this is how you do things. Like if you're doing it that way, you're doing it wrong, kind of a thing. And instead
right.
just being really open, because the universe, this is how I've learned to see it too, is like I could make all the plans in the world and I could follow them very dutifully. And I did that. And it was both great and terrible, mostly terrible. But I did a lot of learning. So that was really good. And understanding that, well, or living the experience of holding my dreams lightly and just visiting with them daily or periodically, uh, I could never have predicted what awesomeness came, like
Mm-hmm.
what serendipity was just created, right? And I the way I've come to think of it is you can't make this shit up. Like you can't plan for it and have it be so serendipitous and amazing. Like it's one or the other. And
You, you can't in all of the ways that many of the world teaches us, right? And what you just
yes.
said is really beautiful because what you just articulated is that I have to create moments where I connect to who I want to become, where I
Mm,
want to go, what I want to accomplish, and allow it to be moments versus a predetermined path,
mm,
right? You allow your subconscious mind to then act on your behalf, and you start priming and conditioning yourself to put ourselves in a position to attract and receive what we want.
mm.
And so, oh, by the way, I think we may have just gotten good news, my friend. We are rocking and rolling longer today.
Hell
So,
yeah.
um, this will be good. Um,
Yay.
but that's truly what starts to happen is people shut themselves off from what's possible. And where I was going with that is that I think it took me a long time to learn this.
Mm,
The only thing real is what's in this moment,
mm-hmm.
right? The past, we know how unreliable our memories can be, right? Whether that's intellectual memory or even cellular memory within our bodies, because our bodies will still lie to us sometimes, even when we've surpassed what it's trying to tell us, right? The future is almost always fabricated. We don't know it until we live into it, till we exist in it. So all we can do is try to allow ourselves in every single moment to be as aligned and intentional as we possibly can in how we choose to use each moment.
Yeah.
And when we have moments to vision forward, that's great. I want moments to vision forward. But moments are also one of the greatest ways that we can escape the patterns of the past.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When I was existing in those low frequency energy emotions, right? I mean, I don't know if you know Hawkins' scale, but shame is the lowest registerable frequency on the scale.
Oh, that
Courage
makes
is
a
like it's
lot of
at
sense.
20, it's
Yeah.
at 20, courage is at 200,
Yeah.
right? Most people are stuck between about 100 and 150 between fear and anger, right?
Yeah.
And so elevating my level of consciousness and frequency becomes a really, really big focus because then I can attract more, I can do more, I can see more. However, what I also have to recognize is that I would spend months and years in that low frequency energy emotion without even knowing it.
Mm, mm,
Right. And now what I recognize is as a human in this body, I'm never going to fully escape those trigger moments, the cellular memory at the deep core for protection and survival. It's hardwired into our existence. However, I can exist in the low frequency energy and emotions for only minutes and moments. It
mm.
doesn't have to be. years. And so if we can recognize and center ourselves in the present, it's not only the greatest way to escape everything we've suffered with, but it's also the greatest way to attract and live into our dreams.
Mm,
But to be present in every moment requires intention.
yeah.
But when your presence is present, it can be potent and it
Yeah.
changes the game for your life.
So much is coming up for me. Oh my, I have goosebumps. I have a very dear colleague. Her name is Dr. Patricia Berlode. She's a retired professor of physics. She used to teach for her, for her decades long career in physics, high energy physics. She taught at the Sorbonne in France. She frequently would work at CERN, the CERN, the big particle. I think it's a collider in it's not in France, but it's somewhere in Europe. And she she has these really interesting ways of like helping me understand high vibration, low vibration, emotions, uh, thoughts, all of the, everything that we can sort of sense in a way that is so practical and at the same time so freeing. Um, and the reason I bring her up is because she's got this wonderful way of talking about time, which is the fourth dimension, right? So we can be anywhere in time that we want at any moment. And for me, that was such a game changer to recognize that and be able to, like, I've actually been able to revisit moments from my past
Yeah.
and be helpful for that me now.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah.
Time is the only thing we can't create more of. However, we can bend and manipulate time to our advantage.
Mm,
And it's by allowing ourselves to recognize that much of time is still a man-made construct. Right? It really is. It's
mm,
a man-made construct and interpretation of how we move through the world with structure.
yeah.
Structure is also designed to protect us. And so many people even confine and trap themselves within time because they don't recognize how to use it effectively.
Mm,
Right?
mm,
And so what you just argued and articulated so beautifully based on her work is we truly can transport ourselves to earlier versions of ourselves. We can re-experience things in moments. And in fact, that's one of the things I do in helping people really start to get to the source of it is getting them in their bodies in the present moment and then giving them a flashback to when the first time in their life they remembered that same physiological pattern.
mm,
Just by allowing their physical body to point them towards what's important, many people will hesitate at first, but within 30 seconds to a minute of the exercise, they'll have 3 to 5 things pop in their head that's like, oh shit, when I was 4, this happened. When I was 8, this happened. When I was 12, this happened. And never in their life have they ever connected the pattern of all of those things until that moment.
mm. Wow.
Right? But when we have the right set of tools in front of us and when we can view time for what it really is, we can allow ourselves to exist in it however we want. Again, I think that being present in this moment, I try to center and ground myself in a couple of basic things. I have this statement that I learned from one of my first coaches. It's be where my feet are,
Mm,
right? I use this frequently because I find myself dense and I need visual reminders. And so when I look down at my feet, I can literally see right here, right now, I'm here with you, Kay. This is all I'm doing right now. This is all I'm thinking about. It's all I'm existing in. It's all I'm allowing in this space.
yeah.
Because if I can be highly present with you, whatever's meant to happen will happen.
Yes.
Anything else is me causing restriction and interference because of where I'm predetermining I need to be or what needs to be happening, when in reality, this is exactly what happened and why. We got bumped back an hour this morning because of time change, which, again, time, right? Could have trapped us. But as a result of it, what I just found out is that the other individual that I thought I was going to have to interview with right after this, he also had a shift with time.
Wow.
This morning, I put intention into the space and said to myself, often it's like, oh, I need this space in this hour. Man, I want to be present with Kay for 2. Sometimes all we have to do is even put it into the ether. Yesterday, I had a group coaching call and I was a little bit low frequency after what I'd done throughout the morning. I
Mm.
was feeling a little bit disconnected from it. But what did I do? I sat with it and I was like, I don't know if this group coaching is going to happen today. And guess what? Nobody showed up. Nobody. But how often do we restrict ourselves and close ourselves off to what's possible instead of opening ourselves to what's really going to serve us in those moments.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can open up time and space just by committing what we hope and desire for that next window, right? I had a scheduled call in 12 minutes from now,
Yeah.
but because of what happened this morning, that's now being rescheduled and I get to be present with you, which is where my focus and energy desired to be.
And like, so much. Creating the world this way, like, because that's really what we're doing. We're creating the world in each moment this way, right? I wonder, I think you would have some very interesting stories to share about the shift that's brought in your own life if you're comfortable, and
Oh yeah.
maybe with some of the folks that you work with. Like, I'd love to hear about how this shows up for you, a little bit
Yeah.
more.
There's a lot behind it, so I'll try to focus and narrow into maybe some of the most relevant and real-time examples.
Mm.
I, by virtue of existing in shame for so many years in so many ways, and I'll expand on that. I learned in my life to receive love, validation, and connection through performance.
Okay.
So my value and my worth, my connection to others for most of my life was a byproduct of what I did, how I showed up, right? And it seemed like in many of those situations that love, admiration, or connection would be contingent upon that. So it drove me to a very, very high degree, but I also lost myself in a lot of that process, right? Why do I say this? I told you what my mindset, my mental toughness was, but at 20, I woke up and went snowboarding and went down and re-broke my left arm and almost lost it again. Went 10 months with it hanging by my side, right? One of the most depressed periods in my adult life. And I also, in that moment, started to get a little bit of resentment, a little bit of frustration because I had done so much for so many people in my life. I was surrounded by people, but I was completely alone and no one was there to help me. Here's the truth, okay? The world just bought into my narrative. Everyone around me believed that Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And they believed that if I needed help, I would ask for it. And I didn't have the courage in my adult life to do so at the time. And so what did that mean to me? It was like, oh man, I'm disconnected. I don't have human connection. That's when I leaned into vulnerability and authenticity. I believe it's the glue that binds human connection. But what did that lead to? It led me down this path of now all of a sudden, I'm chasing what the world told me in terms of how to receive who, which was what house, what car, what amount of money. And I had it all by the time I was 27, but it cost me who I was. And so in the last 12 years, I've been repairing it, but I'll give an example. I was blind to the fact that I existed with anger in my life. Till about 2021. A year after I left my old brick and mortar business, after my wife helped me see myself in a way that I didn't see myself at the time, get unstuck, we go from believing we're in the best place in our marriage to I didn't know if I'd be married for another 30 days.
Wow.
She told me that things I'd done early in our relationship, ways that I showed up, had ultimately caused a path that contributed to her losing who she was. When I was leaving that world to go help others get to the core of who they were, the person I cared about most is sitting there. Presence in that moment is what allowed me to separate from my reaction to be able to respond.
Yeah.
And,
that's really
and
well
I'll give
said.
an example of how the anger would show up. It was like this. Ashley would ask me things like this all the time. She'd be like, hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend? But my shame filter would cause me to hear it this way. Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently. So what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend? And immediately I react because I'm not present and seeing what's right in front of me. And what do? I puff up, I get defensive, I get angry, and then I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last 4 days to show her I'm a good husband and father, even though that wasn't even what she asked.
Yeah.
And so presence in this moment also allows us to separate and truly understand what are we reacting to, because 99% of the time, people are reacting to the trash from their past and nothing to do with what's right in front of them. And so presence in a moment can look like this. If I get triggered, right, I can truly ask myself 2 questions in a moment. Is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past?
Yeah.
And the second, which really centers me and grounds me in this moment, is what am I protecting right now? Because both of those things are preventing me from being present in this moment so that I can make sure I'm receiving and understanding exactly what is intended to be communicated. And it's not being delivered through that opaque force field that I said before.
Yeah.
Right? So presence is really the only way to exist in freedom. And it's the only way to truly understand and exist in truth, because the only thing real is what's right in front of us.
So this is so, oh my gosh, like this is so, what's really fun about our conversation today and what it's becoming is I feel like I'm understanding or hearing about other ways of being me. I don't know if that makes any sense, like, because I live
It
this
does.
way too. So, so in the last week, in less than a week, so in 5 days, someone that I love very, very much, well, I will say that it's one of my kids because I think that's an important part of it, has had 2 sizable surgeries.
Mm,
And, they are handling it so well. And what I'm really noticing, because a question similar to what you were just sharing, a question that I've learned to ask myself when I take an inner sounding and things aren't great is what in me is disturbed by this, right?
yeah.
Like what is going on in here for me? Because how I respond to them is totally based on what's happening in here and understanding of
Always.
why and all that sort of thing, right?
Especially with our kids. Especially
Especially,
with our
yeah, I
kids.
think especially with our kids, yeah.
Yes.
With it, well, it's funny because the people we have a hard time being objective with, right? Like it's a little bit more challenging to be objective with our family and our loved ones. We can
Mm,
see what we want for them, and we, like so a tiny example. So he is recovering from the second surgery, and he wanted to be downstairs where you know, um, he could have his video games, he could have um, blankets, he could have, what he wanted down there. And my experience of the downstairs was that it was cold. I wanted to put the heat on. And he was like, no, I really don't want it. I think it's perfect. And I ended up saying, I was like, shit, like you can't like, and what I ended up
yeah.
saying was I was able to pause and respond instead of reacting. And I said to him, there's this funny line from a comic strip from years and years ago. And it was, I'm cold. You should put on a sweater.
Right.
Like, and
Right.
so, yeah. And I think it really, the other thing that I really love what you're speaking to is, um, we can be best helpful for others, I think, when A, we've got a good understanding of what's going on in here, and B, we can set down our armor and be open in such a way that we want them to get what they want for themselves, not what we want for them
Which is
necessarily.
really difficult. Which is really difficult for most people to do, but I agree completely. We have to detach.
Mm,
We have to remain in a place of having high intent for the other person.
mm,
And we have to center ourselves in objectivity and non-judgment.
mm,
Right. And when we can do that, we can facilitate those spaces for people. But again, it is often about what we're projecting on others that we desire for them. And as coaches, as healers, as people who do that, right? Like it's easy to get trapped in that model of wanting something more for your client than they really want for themselves.
yeah.
Right. We want sometimes more for our kids than they want for themselves. But that doesn't also determine it as right or wrong.
Mm,
Right. One of my favorite quotes is by an author, Ryan Holiday, and it's there is no good or bad without us. There's the event that happens and the story we tell ourselves about it.
mhm,
Right. If we can again recognize and accept the truth that everything from our past is a byproduct of how we've interpreted and created a story around it, and everything in our future is a future forecasted, fabricated story that we're creating, right? Both of them are stories. They're not objective truth, which
mm,
exists in this moment.
mm,
Right. I've said that my kids are my greatest coaches because anytime I go to react, discipline, try to give them some level of improvement, 100% of the times, it's about what I see in myself in them that I'm then criticizing.
yeah.
And so I also have to remove myself and remove that hat and realize that their experience is different. Right. The only thing like pain becomes really, really difficult to measure because it's independent and unique to the person experiencing it, which makes drawing definitive conclusions around pain difficult because we all experience it different. The one universal truth is that we all experience pain.
Mm,
So if we can just accept that as truth and realize that I experience physical and emotional pain differently than my wife does, right? My daughter, who's a redhead, who's also an empath and an intuitive, feels everything. And
Mm.
she's highly sensitized in the way that she does it. If I were to minimize and be like, oh, that doesn't hurt. Oh, that
Yeah.
doesn't hurt. Right? How many times do parents say that? Oh, just pick yourself up. Stop crying. It doesn't
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're immediately taking their truth away from them, which then creates a pattern of armor.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is so beautiful because, again, that's what people get wrapped up in. It, the only thing we have influence or control over are ourselves
Yeah.
and the way that we can show up in each moment. And then hope that by example, by nurture, by conversation, by guiding, we can help others find their own way too. But right, I don't want people dependent on me. It's why we don't work with people beyond 12 months. Because
Mm.
I want to elevate and empower people to go do this on their own, right? It's not about creating a crutch. It's about giving them the tools so they can be successful through their lens of what's possible for them.
Mm. So interesting. So another thing that comes up, I'm curious if you see this in your work, um, or in yourself or with others, with loved ones, is the idea of uh, our ability to be able to say what we want.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
That's
great
a big one.
expression.
That's a big one. That's a huge one. Um, and it's one I'm still working on. You
Yeah.
know, I would tell you 3 or 4 years ago, it got really grounded for me, and it's allowed me to then shift and help more people. You know, I'm not just individuals. I have a double standard when it comes to myself.
Mm.
Right? The advice I give to others and the things I'm willing and not willing to do for others, the ways that I'm going to go move, don't always get held to the same level, right? And I mean that more on the grace and compassion side for self.
Mm.
So I
Yes.
asked one of my mentors a few years back, I was like, what's one of my greatest blocks? And he said, Brian, you're fucking shitty at receiving. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? And he goes, Brian, I have witnessed time and time and time again that if you have a perceived belief that what you're about to ask for will benefit other people, nothing gets in your way.
Mm.
You'll go ask anybody for anything. You've raised hundreds of millions. You've blah, 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 blah. All these other, yep, all that's true. He goes, the second you have a perception that it's going to benefit you, you don't ask.
Wow.
Right. And he hit me with a 2x4 in between the eyeballs because he was right. He was right. I wasn't. And then he went on to explain, he said, Brian, but what I know about you is everything that benefits you flows through you and has a ripple effect in everyone that you work with.
Mm.
So by nature and by virtue, you're actually doing those around you a disservice by not opening yourself to receive all that you're capable of, because that ability that you have to attract and grow has a ripple effect for everybody around you.
Mm.
But again, my shame had caused me to believe I lived, the more I asked for, the more I wanted, the more I felt I needed to make myself small. And so what I think is really, really healthy for people though, in this whole dynamic, and this took me some time to figure out, we do need to understand the difference between needs and wants.
Mm.
I think people need to get clear on their fundamental needs, right? And I mean, we can look at this in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? In the most basic sense, what needs do we need met to feel loved, to feel joy, to feel connected, to feel free, to feel healthy, right? To like, what do we need in our lives to make that happen?
Yeah.
And what I've learned in my life is that everything I've ever needed has always been there in the moments that I need it, even if I don't believe it will be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's really well said. Yeah.
But I think many people are also afraid to dream in their wants.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, even in the way that they dream and forecast, often even protect themselves in what they really want. So what I see is an incremental level of protection. If somebody has 30 pounds to lose, most people are going to say, I'm going to lose 10. It's
Mm.
easier. It's within range. It's right in reach. But here's the reality. You're going to often default to your lowest common denominator. So if you set out to lose 30, you're probably going to lose 20, 25, and maybe you'll get all the way there. But if you set out to lose 10, you're only potentially 30% of the way there if you're successful.
Mm. Mm.
There's that side of it, right? But then there's also dreams, hopes, and desires. Like we have to open ourselves to dream and accept what can be possible, even bigger than what we can envision. But the other side of it, and this is where most people don't really focus, that I do, it came from our philosophy of embracing pain to avoid suffering. Hopes, dreams, and desires are real, but it's also been shown and proven in multiple studies that people are more motivated to avoid pain than they are to chase pleasure.
Mm.
So our
Yeah.
dreaming process, our wants become diluted with all of those areas that we don't want to be hurting, right? You even talked about it earlier. It's like, man, the more I focus on it, the more I fight for something, the more I realize I'm restricting it.
Yeah.
And so if people are more motivated by pain than by pleasure, then how come most folks don't look at their bookends? My hopes, my dreams, my desires, but I also teach people to acknowledge the suffering they wish to avoid in their lives,
Mm.
much of which might already exist in this current moment, right? Because here's the reality for me, I had to learn that my physical body, right? The idea of suffering for me was a life without my wife and my kids. The idea
Mm.
of suffering for my parents was seeing their son grow up with the use of his left arm. The idea of suffering for me with my daughter and her hearing impairment is that someone who wants to be so active, so engaged, and so in touch with everything could miss out on a lot because of her lack of access to language and
Mm.
hearing, right? And so if we understand the suffering, then it allows us to have the motivation on the days that we don't feel like it because we're more motivated to avoid pain. And then we can open ourselves to exist and live in our dreams, wants, and desires. But then we have to vocalize that, not just to ourselves, but externally to the world so that we can actually get it. Now, when we do our bookends, the other thing that I notice most people stop is they'll ask for something and they'll get it and they will not utilize it or they refuse it, even though it's right in front of them.
Mm.
Right? I mean, little things like, again, it could be the scheduling stuff that we talked about. It's like, man, I could have been so stuck on, well, my calendar says this, but instead I put intention and look, our time opened up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And it can be that simple, but most people restrict what they want. Well, or see, people say, hey, what can I do for you today? How can I help you? Oh, nothing, I'm good.
Yeah.
Well, now you've closed off their energetic ability to give and you've blocked your ability to receive simultaneously. So you've actually closed off your ability to have things coming to you and through them because you refuse to accept what you actually have been asking for and they could maybe help you.
Mm. So,
Right?
yeah. And I'm loving all this, and I'm real like the idea of being able to receive, being open to receive that. I literally just wrote a post about that this morning because sometimes in the moments where things are tough, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that what I need to be doing right now is accepting some sort of support, right?
Yep.
Whatever that looks like. And the other thing that I have a curiosity about, and I think maybe I think it's probably best to sort of illustrate it with a story, if that's okay, if that works.
Yeah. Go. Yeah.
So, I think longtime listeners might remember that. Well, first of all, that I a dozen years ago developed a tendon condition that I needed a wheelchair for the first couple of years. That I couldn't go more than a few steps without that, and then I lost the ability to use my hands like others. And for a long time, I had like 5% use of my hands. Now I'm up to about 50% on a good day, and that feels really good. And so the other thing that folks may know is that I walked across England in May. I took 3 weeks and I trained for a year, and the training was it started out to be about like food and body and weight issues, and it ended up being just a complete transformation and understanding of who I really am in here and what I really want. And it was interesting because you were talking before about like avoiding pain.
Mm-hmm.
And um I'm super curious because for me, I noticed this on the England. In fact, I was just thinking about this morning on the England trip. I think you may have heard this said, Brian. I think I first read this in oh my god, A Walk in the Woods, which is the book about two friends who hike the Appalachian Trail. And one of the things that the author says is, if something different hurts every day, you're good. If the same thing starts hurting every day, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there were several times over the first 2.5 weeks, say, where I was like, okay, is this when I'm calling mountain rescue? Like, this thing really hurts. And I would be able to massage it out, or do some sort of self-care, or distract myself, or some of the most wonderful distractions happened for me, which was really, really cool. And again, putting yourself in the place where magic happens and not really understanding what that's going to look like, right? Um, and then I got to the end, about 3 days from the end, I developed a problem with a foot that I could not walk. Like, I could not walk, and I was like, holy shit, like, I don't even know how I'm going to get to my inn. I'm in so much pain. And the next day I got up and walked again. Like, I still, the whole, that's a longer story. But at the end of that second day, where I'd had a real conversation with myself about, like, what does this mean to keep going? And I now have a real understanding of, like, when hockey players, break collarbones and keep going or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't, for a lot of that day, I didn't even feel the pain. I was in a different place. Like, so it's interesting, because the word avoiding it, I think, is where my curiosity is. And the way that I avoided the pain that day was I warmed up and brought myself into, I didn't even, like, this happened all along the trip, and I was able to do it, like, on these days where I wouldn't even feel that I was in my body. I would feel like I was
Yep.
absorbed into the landscape. I was just a part of everything. And I remember saying to the guy who was coaching me at the time, when I put my faith in myself and my abilities, that feels like it's being honored.
Hmm.
And he was like, sort of repeated that back to me. He was like, wow, like, that's what this whole journey has been about, in a way. And I was like, shit, he's so right. Um, and I think when we talk about avoiding pain, I'm wondering, like, how that, I don't really, if I just say that, can we talk a little more
Yeah.
about avoiding pain?
Of course. Of course. Of
I'm
course.
curious where you land on all that.
So the first thing that I want to say is what you just said about faith. This is something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and I always like to ask the question, what is the one thing that faith and fear have in common, other than they start with the letter F?
Mm. I mean, what comes to mind? Well, what comes to mind is how central they are. They're inside us. They're an experience more than
They
it
both have an
can.
undetermined future.
Oh, wow, yeah,
They both have
yeah.
an undetermined future. And so fear is a low frequency, faith is high frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So we're talking about vibration and frequency, like just the idea and intentional choice in any given moment to exist in faith over fear
Mm,
helps us in many ways. Okay? Now, pain is something that I am going to go deep on for a second because I'm a practitioner of pain, like
mm,
in every way. And I'm a practitioner of pain because of the situations I've been in and my focus and need for survival. Let's understand pain at the highest level in terms of what the world tells us and how it's defined, because it's really important for us to center in this. What does the world tells us? It tells us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs,
mm.
right? Look at everything all the advertisements for over-the-counter medications or prescription medications. And I want to be really clear when I say this, I'm not in any way vilifying medications. I think that there's a healthy place to use them as tools and bridges in the right applications. What I'm not a fan of is when medications or anything are used for numbing. But I'm a big
Yes.
believer in the integration between Eastern and Western medicine. And I am a big believer and proponent for the fact that there are certain prescription medications that we need. Some people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, all that said, that's the narrative: reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain. And by
Yeah.
the way, we talked about how this makes sense because it's a natural evolutionary response to survival. 100 years ago, Kay, if you cut your leg, you could have died.
Mm.
That's not the reality for most of us anymore. And so part of this is also we have to recognize it's time to update our operating systems, because the worlds that we're living in today, we're not reacting and trying to survive from the same things that we used to. We're
Mm.
trying to survive by covering up, right, the pox on our face with bangs for years because it might not look good, right? Like, and I love that you laugh at that because I'm having fun with you as an
Of
example,
course. No,
right?
it's a
But we
perfect
all do it,
example. Like, this
right?
is
But
the
we all do it.
suffering. Right?
And again, pain is difficult to measure. But again, how's pain defined?
Mm.
Pain, by definition, is a direct result from some impact, something. It's short term, intermittent, and it heals once that direct cause is removed.
Mm.
Now, what do we do as human beings? We then screw it up by putting other adjectives in front of it, like acute and chronic.
Mm.
To the
Mm-hmm.
point of it's only a problem when you exist in the same amount of pain day after day after day after day after day, right? Acute maintains the definition, right? But chronic inherently changes it because it implies that it's no longer short term and it persists after that direct cause is removed.
Yep.
So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is, suffering.
Mm.
Okay. Now, we
Mm.
don't want to admit that suffering exists in our lives, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices.
Mm.
But again, the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance, because until we accept the current state of things, we cannot alter them. So for me, what's really fascinating, and we've skipped over different portions of the journey and the story, but I'll tell you that I was in daily physical pain for nearly 31 years.
Mm.
I've been pain-free for 9 months.
Wow.
Okay. Most of us experience the reality, we experience pain, and we experience and center ourselves in this world through our physical body. My physical injuries were sometimes the only things that knocked me out of wherever I was to center in the now and see reality.
Mm.
But what I also realized years later is that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I also shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years and didn't even realize it.
Mm.
So my physical body had healed from all of my injuries. But why then am I experiencing physical pain? It's a manifestation of the other areas that bled into my body and were tapping my nervous system and causing me to experience and feel things that are different than were my reality.
Wow.
So my progression through pain went from physical to intellectual, because that's where I lived.
Yep.
And I had to heal the intellectual pains and stories that existed there so that I could start getting in my body.
Wow.
Right? My emotional pain came next. And here's something I've said for years: if we don't feel, we don't heal. Period.
Yep.
There's science that now proves this, though, because they've seen that there's 40,000 cells in the heart that are called sensory neurites. They're brain-like cells that carry cellular memory.
Mm.
And what they've shown is if you go through the intellectual process of patterning your past alone, and you don't associate the embodied emotions to feel it, that those 40,000 cells don't heal.
Mm.
What's fascinating about this journey of pain is that I then healed most of my emotional pain, which unlocking the three of those is what allowed me to elevate my consciousness and my spirit so that I'm moving from brain into mind.
Yeah.
Okay. That's when I started to learn how to move energy through my body. That's when I learned how to start envisioning and even looking at cellular repair internally. Like, I started down this path of really understanding it. I've now been pain-free for 9 months. And why do I tell you that? Because just last week, I had to redefine my experience because I was still rooted in my physical body. What do I mean by that? Detachment is a word that I have used powerfully for years. I detached from pain, right? I had a detached arm that led to an unintentional life of detachment to learning how to use being detached effectively. However, detachment was a positive shift for 90% of my world. But as it related to my relationship with my body or my relationships with those that I cared most about, detachment equaled disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that mean? I was afraid that now that I created the freedom that I desired by anchoring in me and understanding these things in my physical body, that I have to then continue to allow the thoughts and the emotions to flow because that's what was going to keep myself open. When in reality, I can also create stops in both of those hierarchies and exist in my mind, which allows, and that's what's created my freedom in my body. People avoid pain though, right? And it makes sense. But again, to use this concept to help people understand it, you can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains from a sedentary lifestyle.
Yep.
You can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of being stuck in a loveless marriage or wanting divorce and not having a way out. You can embrace the pain of the difficult and the fits your kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation you'll never get back. As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of stagnation and losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture.
Yeah.
The issue is that people react to pain that's right in front of them But again, like I say often, we need to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And that's also where we gain freedom. Because pain is just like perspective, it always points you towards what's important if you're paying attention.
Yeah. Mm. Ooh, all the goosebumps. This is so beautiful. I well, so much is, I mean, the first thing that like the first thing that comes up is a return to earlier in our conversation where we were talking about earning this fucking joy, right? Like you, if I can't feel, if I wasn't when I wasn't feeling the so-called negative emotions, I was not also capable of feeling the joy that I feel now. And there's a flow to it. There's a sort of, for me, the idea of keeping my heart open and letting, like, not getting stuck in or clinging to an idea that like I used to think I wasn't a holder of grudges. And then I realized that the way that showed up for me was I would think about how people hurt me so badly, right? Like,
Mm.
oh no, this person hurt me so much. And like that is absolutely my interpretation of it. My understanding of it is it is such a grudge to hold. Oh, I can't engage with this person in the way that I would wish because they hurt me. Like that was a really toxic way to think. And it really influenced me for a long time. And being able to let go of that and really see that person for who they, for example, I mean, any person, but like there's one instance that I'm thinking of in particular where when I was able to say, wow, I now see from your perspective, and I now have so much compassion for what you were going for.
Yep.
And I apologize because I feel like I owe you an apology. And I'm going to try and do better now in terms of like just seeing you as a whole person and understanding that, like, anyway. And then the thought of like putting like faith and fear, I think that's really like they're both having to do with this sort of undetermined future. But if we are caught up in fear, if we're caught up in thoughts, um, that's what will determine our future. And the same is if we're able to sort of uh, come through it. I don't mean push through it in a like yucky fighting way, but I mean more like allowing it to exist and sitting with it, and just as you were saying before about having those courageous conversations to be at a different level with someone,
Yep.
whatever that looks like, addressing the pain to alleviate it and continue on our journey, right? Like the language that I had to retire to be able to do that. I remember writing this, consciously saying, I am retiring the words scar tissue from my language right now. Because when I thought about the tendons and developing the scar tissue, I just got so scared. I was afraid to walk. And
Yeah.
like, you can't cross England if you're afraid to walk. so
You
well,
can't. And, Dr. Susan Jeffers, I think, has one of the best frameworks around fear that I've come across and studied.
mm,
And she ultimately outlines that there's 3 levels of fear. I'm going to butcher this slightly, but the end one, the most important one, I'm going to nail. So
mm,
I just own that out of the gate. Level 1 fears are those fears that are like outside of us, those things that happen to us, right? Like financial loss, COVID, business destruction, divorce, like stuff that happens in our external world. Then there's the level 2 fears, which are those internal fears. It's things that are thoughts, fabrications, fears of like what will and won't happen, the low frequency energy emotions. And then the third level of fear, and this is where she outlines is where freedom exists for most people, is the question that's just very simple. Am I going to be okay?
mm,
And what she outlines is that if we can start to use the patterns of our past as knowledge and understanding of all that we've already endured, all that in every situation we were afraid of, we ultimately, even if there was damage and pain in moments, like the fact that you're still existing today means that you've been okay.
mm-hmm.
And so the root of all fears being the answer to that question, she suggests if you could ultimately determine that no matter what, never fails, like you will be okay, you will have what you need, you will be safe, you will be taken care of, then really what is there to fear?
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that, again, I think fear gives us feedback and it hones our focus if we're paying attention.
Yeah.
Right. Again, it's one of those areas where it's like, fear exists as a result of something that we're protecting ourselves from. Right. Something that's showing up and is concern or fear. Right. This shows up all the time. It's like for people with money, it's like they're afraid that they're going to lose their job, even though every other
Yeah.
indication would show that they're a high performer and they're well admired, but they're like, they exist in this scarce, like, I'm going to lose everything.
Yeah.
Well, what is everything? Right. Again, if we understand the hierarchy of needs, then yes, there's quality of life. There's ease with certain elements that exist in our life when we have more resources. Yeah, yes, it makes life easier. But truly, like, what are our needs? And like, what are we afraid of?
Yeah.
What is everything? And when we can start to just deconstruct even the way we view our world, we start to realize, like, we're just highly conditioned beings. And we can also decide at any moment how we want to further condition ourselves
Mm.
and show ourselves what we're capable of opening up to. And again, that's why, it's minutes and moments. If I have a thought of fear that crosses into my world, I either dissect it or refuse it.
Mm.
But our bodies will also lie to us in times that aren't necessarily accurate. Right. So like just yesterday morning, I said that to my wife. I woke up, I was low frequency, my body was off, it didn't feel good. And I was like, it's funny because I feel like my body, my physical narrative is trying to convince my emotions and my mind of something that's not true for me right
Hmm. That feels like such a great sort of definition of anxiety, really.
now. Yeah. I mean,
Like,
pre-stage always, like anytime I would take stage for a keynote, I used to get so stressed and so anxious until I surrendered and realized what it really was. Energy waiting to be deployed.
beautiful.
Right?
Beautiful.
Anxiety and like anticipation and excitement actually show up in our bodies mapped very similarly. It feels like we're vibrating in some cases.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So then we have to recognize, like, what is our body telling us and what is real and true for us in this moment based on what's in front of us. Because again, most of my pain was a byproduct of the interpretation of my mental, intellectual, and spiritual healing that needed to take place. And once I moved through those things and I could detach my existence from this physical body, right, and realize that I am so much more than this human meat suit, that's where I created the freedom.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So, so beautiful, Brian. As we are wrapping up, um, I wonder if you have any, I don't know, final thoughts or ways of connecting, you know, what we've talked about today. Like, where are you landing in our conversation?
What I'm called to do is to read you something that I wrote last week.
Awesome.
And I think you'll understand why when I do. So let me pull it up so that I can read it. Now, what this was one of those moments where I had interference. I had resistance and I had things where I felt like I needed to clear my space, my energy, my head, my heart, like open myself up. So I sat down for 15 minutes. I pulled out my computer and this is what came out.
All right.
Some days I feel completely in flow and others feel the opposite and slow. It is in no way about the speed, rather the state that doesn't feel freed. When we seek and gain what we desire, sometimes our minds will try to convince us to retire. But really, it's all about freedom, the kind that feels like ruling a kingdom. Freedom only truly exists within, but most try to prove that they always win. Understanding what winning creates is key. It's something that forces hierarchy. Hierarchy creates competition with each other, not within the gift given to the world by your mother. When comparison takes over, we all lose. This is something we must each choose. Do we compare ourselves against our prior selves or to others like we do with products on shelves? One will leave you feeling alive and full. The other will leave you angry like a bucking bull. So let's stop viewing ourselves through the outside lens and forget about all the surface level trends. Lean further and further into everything you. This is the best way to rarely feel blue. So on the days that feel slow and stuck, I remind myself to not be such a schmuck. Then I force a shift in my perspective and center myself in truth, which is neutral and objective. The removal of my self-protection is the only way I guarantee I'll prevent disconnection. Then I can remain free and in flow and shift from slow to allowing my light to glow.
Thank you. Thank you. What comes up for me is how wonderful it is that you show up so wholly and completely, and that you really bring your full self to this moment, to our whole conversation, to the right, like that connected basically everything that's come up in our conversation, and it felt so true to you, Brian.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, I think that's why I pulled it up. It felt resonant to the message of our conversation today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I cannot thank you enough for being here. I'm so grateful to Shannon Connery, who's also, she's been a podcast guest as well, for introducing us, because like she knew what she was doing, man.
Anna is incredible, man. She's a world changer, and I know the impact she's had on me, and I know the people she attracts to her, people like you, other world changers, others who are leading with heart, who see people, their pain, their protection, and their potential. And you know, you're a light worker, you're a healer, you're somebody who's pulling people into what's possible instead of having them feel like they need to continue to push things down. So thank you. Thank you, because you two are both gifts to this world.
I received that. Thank you for listening and for watching, those of you who are here with us. You can find Brian at brianbogert.com. The link is in the show notes. Brian does these really fun, well, first of all, he does these really beautiful posts and writings, which I've seen in Instagram. And also, the other thing that Brian does on Instagram is Instagram Lives. And I think actually by the time this conversation comes out, I will have been on in Instagram Live with you. Although it's very possible that it'll be like the week before. So we'll have to see which is first. I don't really remember, but I'm so excited about that too. That's going to be such a blast. And Brian was just pumping his fist for for those of you listening. So yeah, connect with this very gentle, very wonderful, very vibrant man. I highly recommend it. And I like to end our show with a final huge thank you to our producer, the man who has been increasingly allowing me to do more of the podcast production. And he's enthusiastic and so graceful in terms of like helping me understand, and it's sort of shows his whole true nature, which is to be very, very, very gentle. He is not just our producer. He is also the 26th-time winner of the Husband of the Year Award, Benjamin Culp. And I'm so grateful for him in my life. And yeah, and just finally, I'm super grateful for you, Brian, for being here, for everyone who's here along with us and listening. And yeah, thanks for being here. We will see you next time.